Morning peeps, good morning everyone. How's everyone doing? Hopefully you guys are all doing well. Don't forget, if you're new to the channel, like, share, subscribe. Alright, let's get to it. The big news yesterday, Shakur Stevenson out of his fight with Joe Cordina, a hand injury. Matchroom announced it yesterday. Shakur Stevenson put up something on his Instagram, I think having just undergone surgery, saying that he's going to be back in 2025. All right, loads to unpack here, loads to discuss. Firstly, look, we wish Shakur Stevenson a speedy recovery. A talent like that we need to see in the ring. We don't see enough of him in the ring, by the way. We're going to get to that as well. The first thing that I thought for some reason was this is why it's important, and I know it's difficult financially, but this is why it's important to have stacked cards. Because when a name like Shakur Stevenson comes off a card and it doesn't really affect the card. I mean, look, we want to see Shakur Stevenson on the card, don't get me wrong. But when it doesn't really affect the card, there's no talk of cancellation, is there? That's when you know you've got a deep card and there are other intriguing matchups that you're also interested to see. So yeah, that's important. A hand injury, look, not good. I mean, these are boxers' tools, but it happens. Hopefully they don't rush him back. As much as I do want to see him in the ring, hopefully they don't rush him back and he recovers from that, because once you start getting hand injuries, I mean, it's never good, is it? It's never good for a fighter, especially a young fighter as well. There's now going to be a lot of talk. It's funny, actually, because this was the one fight on that card where people were like, I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, why is Joe getting this fight coming off a loss, moving up in weight? All of a sudden now, we actually can make a proper fight that makes sense for Joe Cordina, right? I mean, there are now, I think, several options that make sense for his first fight, or his first fight at the world level, if you like, as a lightweight. Obviously, he has fought British level as a lightweight. I think the two, like, I tweeted this, I think the obvious name, and we are a month out, so you can get ready. I mean, any fighter now that is fringe world level should stay ready, because obviously Riyadh season cards, as I said, are so deep that if a fighter does get injured, they don't just pull the fight or the fight card, they will try and find a replacement. So you should always stay ready. So you've got a month to get in shape for Joe Cordina. I think that's long enough. I mean, look, I'm not a fighter. I don't fucking know how long it takes to get in fighting shape. But I think fighters should always be in fighting shape, right? The obvious name for me is Zelfa Barrett, who is a very, very big super featherweight. I mean, he would, I think, want the jump to lightweight for the right fight. He has been chasing Joe Cordina. He's wanted a fight with Joe Cordina for a couple of years. I don't know how and why it's not materialized, but he's been wanting that fight. He was obviously, I don't know if you guys know this, I mentioned it in a video a couple of weeks, but he was offered the Shakur Stevenson fight. And at the time, he said no for whatever reason, right? Financially, maybe not ready. I don't know. He said no. He will be ready and wanting the Joe Cordina fight. Like, if he gets the call, and hopefully he's had the call now already, hopefully him, Steve Wood, Pat Barrett are like, yep, we're ready. Give us, like, we need 4.5, 5 weeks to get in shape. Remember, they don't have to cut that much weight anymore as well. I mean, they still have to cut, but they've got an extra 5 pounds to play with. I think that's the obvious one. And I think it's a fight that makes sense as well. I think a fight that makes sense for Joe Cordina. The problem with this one for Joe now is that everything shifts a little bit. The Shakur Stevenson fight was, you weigh up the risk, you weigh up the reward. The risk was very, very high, but the reward was massive. You beat Shakur Stevenson a pound for pounder. You win a world title with another weight class. It's huge. It's huge. Now you have to weigh up the risk differently when you do come down a level or two. And no disrespect to Zelfa, but we are coming down a level or two. So he's got to think of, it makes sense. Like, do they just find an easier opponent, like what you would do after coming off a devastating stoppage? You'd find an easier opponent moving up in weight. But I think Zelfa Barrett makes sense. Another name that I wouldn't mind seeing Joe have a fight with, who I think is always an addition to a card, a good addition to a card, brings energy, George Kambosos. Now, there has been a lot of talk about Liam Paro versus George Kambosos, George moving up to 140. I think if George gets the call to be co-main event on a big Riyadh season card, the Liam Paro fight's a big one. Don't get me wrong, it's a big one. 2 Aussies. It's a big fight in Australia. I get it, right? Again, George looking to become a 2-weight world champion. But I almost feel like this one for George could be interesting and intriguing as well. And I think for Joe, it's a good fight. It's a really good fight to see where you are at 135 pounds against a world level. Let's not shit on George Kambosos. A world level lightweight. I like it. I really like it. So look, there are a couple of options there. There are more, but I think those are the two that I think make sense. And I actually think people would prefer to see Joe versus Kambosos and Zalfa Barrett more than see Joe versus Shakur Stevenson. Again, people were kind of scratching their heads about why that fight's being made. So I feel like that could happen. And fingers crossed that does happen. But again, going back to it, it's good that a name like Shakur can come off a card and it doesn't affect the card. All right, let's talk about Shakur Stevenson. What this obviously means for Shakur is that he's only had one fight this year. Again, this isn't his fault, right? I mean, injuries happen, but it's only one fight this year. It was 2 fights last year. It was 2 fights the year before. Shakur is now that guy. He's become that guy where he's only having 2 fights a year. And, you know, I used to kind of say 2 or 3 fights a year is good, right? I mean, ideally 3. I've changed my mind on this. And there's a couple of fighters that have made me change my mind on this. One of them is arguably pound for pound king, right? Inoue. If Bob Arum said that Inoue potentially, or will, sorry, not even potentially, will have one more fight before the end of the year. That's 4 fights. That's 4 fights at world level. World title fights, world championship level fights, right? If Inoue can do it, I'm sorry. I'm no excuses. Because there used to be an argument like, yeah, but these fights are all massive fights and it's difficult to kind of have these fights 3-4 times a year. Well, Inoue's fucking fighting in stadiums. And if he can do it, I'm sorry, others should be doing it. Another fighter that's really, really busy as well, who's about to have his 5th fight in 15, 16 months, or at least let's just make it easier and say full fight in 12 months, Nick Bull. And by the way, Nick Bull's fights, it's not like Nick Bull is sleeping his opponents and having 2 rounders. Nick Bull's going 12, 12, 12, 12, 12. Check out his last 4 or 5 fights have all gone 12 rounds. But Nick Bull is about to have his full fight in 12 months against Ronnie Rios. That's 3 world title fights, and the one that was a non-world title fight was against a former world champion in Isaac Dogbo. Again, he's going deep in all these fights. These fights are tough. These are not easy. It's not gimmies. So he's doing it as well. I feel like a lot of these top talents that we love in America, we love them. We appreciate them. Gervonta Davis, Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney's given us a bit more. Ryan obviously has an asterisk now. But these guys are giving us 1 or 2 fights a year and we're celebrating them. We need to see more. We need way more activity. Again, I just mentioned 2 world champions there. A pound for pounder. And again, we're talking, these aren't gimmies they're having. You know, these aren't just knockabouts where they're blowing out guys in 1 or 2 rounds, which then would make sense to be busy. They're going deep in all their fights. Nick Bull is literally 12 rounds, 12 rounds, 12 rounds, 12 rounds. And you see the pace Nick Bull sets. So why are these guys, why are the Shakurs, Gervontas, Devons, Teofimos only having 1 or 2 fights a year? Like I feel like we've just accepted it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting though now to see what Shakur does in the comeback fight. Because again, remember, they wanted William Zepeda. William Zepeda fights on that November card. Chris Benham-Smith versus Zerdo. I doubt that's going to happen now. I don't know the severity of the injury, but I mean, if you're having surgery, that's going to take time to heal. And then you're going to be a bit cautious, you know, taking time to kind of punch with bigger gloves than the smaller gloves. I mean, he could be out until spring, summer 2025. Could be out that while. So it's it's not good, is it? So do you go straight in with a killer? I mean, do you go straight in with Gervonta? Do you do that? Do you test yourself? Do you go straight in with a killer in Zepeda, who's also a killer, by the way? It's going to be very interesting to see what Shakur does. But I think for Joe Cordina, obviously he's going to stay on the card. I'm guessing he's going to have his choice of opponent, but I think his choice, or at least within the choice, should be Zalfa Barrett and George Kambosos. That's what I think. All right, let's have a look. Hamza Shiraz disappointed that Chris Eubank Jr. is facing Camille Zaramata. Me too. I'm speaking to Chris and I will ask him that question on Wednesday. I'm doing a bit of a sit down, walk and talk interview with Chris Eubank Jr. Looking forward to it. We shall see. Dana White open to Canelo Alvarez, Conor McGregor next. Fucking there was a fear that the Canelo card would be in trouble just because of the UFC card. I'm a big UFC fan. UFC 306 ain't that. Unfortunately, it's an okay card. I expected a lot more for their first big card in the sphere. Like a lot of people talking about it could be something special. It ain't. So I do think there are two different fan bases anyway, but I do feel like there are fight fans like myself that could steer to one or the other. And if you are going to steer to one or the other, I think you might just steer to Canelo just out of intrigue, just because you got, I don't know how good a fight this is going to be, but you got Danny Garcia, Erislandy Lara. Danny was once a fucking great fighter, so was Lara. You got Caleb Plant in the card, Rolly Romero. You might be interested in that as opposed to what the UFC have. All right. Anything else? All right, we'll end on this one very quickly. Roy Jones Jr. Canelo Alvarez is not running scared from David Benavidez. He kind of is. He kind of is. You know, the one thing that Canelo has spoken about with regards to Benavidez for some reason is about his size. Although he never brought this conversation up with Bivol, who's also big, and Callum Smith, who's big. He's bringing up Benavidez' size. He's not mentioned once the size of Berlanga. Not mentioned it once. Berlanga fucking huge. Berlanga is like Benavidez. Trust me, I've been around both. I've seen both together. Berlanga will be 200 pounds there or thereabouts, around that. He's going to put on at least 25 pounds from weigh-in to fight night. Hasn't said anything about Berlanga because he's not afraid of Berlanga's skills. He's not weary of Berlanga's skills. He's clearly weary of Benavidez's. Hence why he keeps on bringing up the fact that Benavidez is so big. It's almost like he's like saying he's not just so big, he's so skillful and so dangerous. Because he's always fighting big guys. Canelo's always the undersized guy. But all of a sudden you mention Benavidez's size, which is interesting. It's difficult for me to say he's running scared because I look at the CV and it's fucking filled with killers. But there's a reason he doesn't want to fight him. Because it's the fight to make. It's the fight to make. It's a fight that will do great numbers. It's a fight that will do, I want to say great numbers, I mean in terms of selling out the arena, a really good gate. It's a fight that will do great numbers on pay-per-view. It's the fight everyone wants to see. Ain't happening. Oh, okay, this is interesting. I said we're going to end on this. I saw Anthony Fowler, former boxer, Mr. CBD, right? I think he came out and said he was there when Dubois sparred AJ. And remember all this rumor about Dubois hurting AJ, and he confirmed it. He said Dubois, I think, landed a left hook on AJ, and AJ's legs went stiff, and Dubois could have followed up but didn't. Rob McCracken was like, AJ, get out of the ring. So we now know, right? Because neither of these two have really said it. I asked a question at the face of like what happened, and neither wanted to answer. Or at least AJ was asking Dubois to say something Dubois didn't want to do. That was 7 years ago, I've been told as well. Sparring stories are sparring stories, people. Sparring stories are sparring stories. I mean, Hrgovic was the sparring killer. I mean, the amount of stories I heard about Hrgovic, and we saw Dubois put it on him and he didn't really like it. I think Chris Eubank Jr. spoke about sparring George Groves, and we saw how their real fight turned out. Sparring stories. Let's just wait for the real thing. We haven't got long to go. What is it, 8-9 days to go, and then we'll find out who's telling the truth and who's not. Who is the big daddy. Peace and love.